This is Judson Sapp. You're listening to Never Off Duty. This week, we've got returning Ryan Backmann and Sheriff Michelle Cook. And as we were talking about last episode, we have a Project Cold Case that we're going to go a little bit in depth to. This is going to be something that we're not just done today talking about this case. I want everybody to understand that. We're going to talk about it briefly today and go into more with the actual detective working the case in a future episode.
And Judson, with your permission, I'd love to bring in our detectives over the next several weeks and talk about the cold cases that we have open here in Clay County. Because as we've said before, we need one person, the right person to hear this to break a cold case wide open.
Absolutely. And it's funny when a sheriff says with your permission, because I'm so taught for law enforcement that Sheriff Cook would be like, get on top of the table. I'm like,
I am sitting here with my gun on my hip, so with your permission, as I tap my gun, yes.
But no, I appreciate that, and I think it's fascinating. I think it's something the listeners will. I mean, honestly, that's probably why they're tuning in for things like that. So I'm happy to host and talk about that. So again. For people that did not listen or don't remember from last week, let's talk about the case and the victim and let's get into this.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me back again, Judson, Sheriff Cook. I really appreciate these opportunities because for me, my job is not investigating. My job is to raise awareness for these victims and their families. And I think it's wonderful that you're going to bring in the detective that can talk more specifics about the case, where I'm going to talk about family dynamics and I'm going to talk about my personal conversations with Terrell Orcutt's sisters and what we have tried to do for them over the years in raising awareness for Terrell's case. And I'll go over, an overview of the situation that happened. But I think this is a great opportunity to kind of define roles. And, sometimes my role at Project Cold Case gets a little misunderstood or skewed. And I like to say, law enforcement has their lane and their investigation, and my nonprofit and our advocacy has a lane. And there's this little bit of overlap, and that's strictly the family. It doesn't overlap with the investigation. It doesn't overlap with testing evidence and that kind of thing. So this is a great opportunity for me to share exactly what we do and why, and then follow it up with specifics that the investigator can share that hopefully the community can come together. And
we're going to talk about the Terrell Orcutt case. But you guys, if I'm not mistaken, have 1,300 cases highlighted on your website, which is projectcoldcase.org.
Correct.
And so if anybody wants to go take a look at any one of the cold cases from around the country that you're advocating for, they can go to your website. But I appreciate you coming in here today and talking about a Clay County case that really has gripped this community for so many years.
And very fast, because some people might not have listened to the last episode. Let's talk about your organization so that people understand this is an organization that if you've got three criteria, if somebody needs assistance, I guess, with the best.
Yeah, we offer resources to families of unsolved homicides, specific to families. So the criteria is you're related to somebody that was the victim of an unsolved homicide. It's been at least a year since that incident, and that it has been ruled a homicide, because that's what we do. And we're a nonprofit. We're based out of Jacksonville, Florida. So we serve a lot of local families. Here in Clay County, there's only 4 cold cases within the sheriff's office jurisdiction. I think there might be a couple more with the municipalities, the police departments. But that's the backstory if they missed last week. And specifically today, I want to talk about Terrell Orcutt. Many of your listeners will probably know the case. But what I want to talk about is Terrell as a person, why she was important to this community, why she's important to her family, why her family now 30 plus years later is still desperate for those answers. A lot of times people think that, time heals all wounds, or that, you just kind of get over it as time goes by. And that's not true. It's simply not true. And this family is just one instance of that. So Terrell Orcutt was only 26 years old. January 21st, 1990, her car is found. It was a red Ford Thunderbird, and it was found abandoned on the side of County Road 218 in Middleburg. The lights were on. The engine was running. The door was open. I believe her purse and some of her personal belongings were still in the car. She wore glasses, and her glasses were found away from the car, and she was nowhere to be seen. Unfortunately, a few days later, about a week later, Terrell's remains were found off of Lee Drive near Black Creek, about 4 or 5 miles from where her car was found. Again, this was 1990. At that time, Terrell has siblings, and her mother is around and desperate for answers. The case goes cold, and unfortunately, her mother passes away in the meantime, not getting an opportunity to get answers and justice, at least earthly justice. And that's something that we deal with a lot in our organization, is this struggle for families to find out while they're still here. And unfortunately, Terrell's mom, didn't get that opportunity. One of the things we do is, when we're raising these awarenesses, we refer to old articles. We interview the families. We use, as I mentioned in our last podcast, a partnership with the University of North Florida in their journalism class. And so we were able to get this quote from Terrell's mom at one point, pretty much on her deathbed. And she says, the only thing I want to know from that person is why. I don't want to know what you did or how you did it or anything. I want to know why her. And
wow.
And that, unfortunately, she never got to find that out here on Earth. But those were the things, as she's dying, that were haunting her in this case, and the abduction and murder of her daughter. So we put Terrell on one of our cold case playing cards. We distributed those to the Clay County Sheriff's Office, who distributed them throughout the jail. Also, the Sheriff's Office was nice enough to mention Terrell's death and open, cold case investigation on the anniversary this year, January 21st. But one of the other things that I want to talk about is kind of what is helpful and what is not. It's really helpful when the Sheriff's Office shares that information and gets that information out there. Right. And cold cases are kind of a pop culture phenomenon. Everybody loves them until it happens to somebody and it kind of
I've never heard that before. That everybody loves a cold case until it happens to somebody you know.
And you're right.
That cuts to the heart right there. Yeah.
We talked about this last episode. It's if you remove what's going on an emotional level, it's fascinating to people.
Right.
And unfortunately, you have a lot of people that they don't, even they just completely disregard the compassionate side completely. And then you also have, from the detective side, how they have to compartmentalize the emotional side to just focus on the facts and solve the case. And but yeah, no, that's a very great quote.
Yeah, it's something that we deal with because true crime, like I define true crime as an entertainment genre.
Right.
I define real crime as what Terrell's family is going through, what I went through, with my dad's case, and what law enforcement is working with. There is a distinct difference between true crime and real crime. And I think it's important, most people that are fans of true crime are not bad people. It's not malicious that they enjoy that they're interested in that. But I think kind of lost over time has been, how do you show that compassion and empathy while still taking an interest in these cases and trying to do whatever you can as a citizen to help, resolve them?
And I want to go back just a little bit for those that are just tuning in to today's podcast. You started Project Cold Case because your father was murdered, and it is still an unsolved homicide, and so your desire to be a voice for the families and for the victims, really. Yeah. That's your story and why you started Project Cold Case.
Yeah, my this is all pure. It is based on my experience. It's kind of an internal struggle I have. The worst thing that has ever happened to me has become the best thing that has ever happened to me. I have purpose, I have cause, I have passion, and I love what I do, and I love the people that I get to meet with and interact with, and I love these families that but for the murder of my own father, I would have never known. And I create relationships with them. And that's pretty special. And it sucks that it happened the way that it did. And I do struggle with that sometimes internally, but this is where I am, and this is what, I feel like I'm called to do. Similar to the name of this podcast, Never Off Duty. I mean, when you live through this, it never goes away. If it's the middle of the night, I'm thinking about these families. I'm thinking about ways to raise awareness. I'm thinking about ways that we can help. One thing that Terrell's family didn't necessarily experience, because this was a bit of a high profile case. In fact, kind of touching back on it, there was some information that was investigated early on in this case that maybe, law enforcement was involved. And I think that stemmed from an FHP officer actually being involved in another case in another jurisdiction. And so they looked at him as it related to Terrell Orcutt. As far as I know, and the detective will come in and talk about it more, but none of that was ever substantiated. That was something that was looked at because it was a possibility.
But it really grew a life of its own.
But it really grew a life of its own. And I was reading through comments on the sheriff's office, anniversary post about Terrell Orcutt. And there are people in the community that they're just convinced. They heard that one time, in 1990, and now that's the fact. Right. And that's it. And I think that's a dangerous place to be, because that's not it. That's not a fact yet. That has not been confirmed. In fact, I think most Clay County deputies and police were identified and located and accounted for during that time. I'll let the investigator talk about it if they want to, but when we talk in definities,
there's a difference between investigative theory or maybe, or I should look at this angle versus actual provable fact. And sometimes theories or filling in the gaps with what you think may have happened grow a life of their own, and then they become distracting to the actual case.
Exactly.
And yeah.
And I think that's what appears to have happened here. Of course, this case is still unsolved, so we don't know yet exactly what happened. But the reality was, I think it shows in this community the effort that was put in was no stone was going to be left unturned. If it was an officer, they were going to look at that, and they did. And I think, again, we're talking about social media. We're looking for help here. We're not looking to cloud the waters, muddy the waters. We're not looking to, we're not looking for necessarily citizen detectives to solve this. We're looking for people with information to come forward. And that's what is important. That's what Terrell's family needs. We can theorize on every unsolved case there is about all the ways that it could have happened. But the reality is when it comes to helping, that's a little bit different. It shifts the focus from, I'm sure, Sheriff Cook, you've been in trials before where the prosecutor says, beyond a reasonable doubt, not a forced doubt, not anything that you can think of creates a doubt. It has to be a reasonable doubt. And I think, people are very interested in engaging with cold cases and being a part of it. And so I think sometimes they go a little bit too far. and I think it's important to remember what is helpful in an investigation and what isn't. And so I think that this podcast is going to be great because we can now cut through all of the rumors and innuendo and what ifs and speculation, and we can have the real information from the investigator. We can have the real feelings from the family, and kind of put it all together in a package that allows the listeners to experience this as a real event and not just as a sensational, television show.
Right. And I think what's important too is what your organization does is it keeps the conversation going, because you never know when you might have been a truck driver driving down that road that night and you saw something, but you never put two and two together. And then this is the first time you're hearing of it.
Yeah.
Because unfortunately, there's a lot of people on this earth, and you might not have paid attention to something that's in the back of your head. And that's where something that could be actually useful information can come from versus theorizing and, when you don't have it. But so I'm very excited that we're doing this. So what I'd like to talk about is how did this family come to you? And then what stage, how have you walked them through the process? And I'm asking from obviously to understand your organization better. And also if there's somebody else out there that needs help, they can kind of do the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely, Judson. So this family, we're based out of Jacksonville, so a Clay County case is not that far. They heard about us online, saw us on the news, whatever it was. They went to our website and submitted Terrell, their sister, to us as an organization with the idea that we were going to put Terrell's picture up and we would work on ways to raise awareness. So we get the picture, we put it in a little frame. It has her name, it's an unsolved homicide, and the date and location of the incident. And it goes on our website, and we share it on social media. And that's kind of the start of the awareness campaign, is just one picture with very brief description of what happened. Then as we grow as an organization and we utilize our resources like the University of North Florida's journalism class, we take Terrell's case in and we hand it to a student. And we call Terrell's sisters and we say, hey, look, we have this opportunity to do a story about Terrell's life. We're not going to define her by her death. Of course, we have to talk about what happened because that's why you're a part of Project Cold Cases family. But we're going to talk about her life. So let's talk about those 20 plus years that she was alive and what she meant to you and what were her favorite holidays and what's your favorite memory of her. That's what the student's going to ask. And so the student does, as part of their grade for that semester, does an interview with a family and writes a spotlight article is what we call them. And then eventually hands that back to us. We publish that on our social media and our website, projectcoldcase.org. And then we start looking at other ways to raise awareness. Of course, we're hoping that people see that, they share that somebody comes forward. At Project Cold Case, again, we have very defined roles. We don't take tips. I mean, we take them, but that's not our goal. We don't hand out rewards. There's Crime Stoppers for that. There's other the sheriff's office. There's other options for that. If somebody does give us a tip, we just hand it directly to the investigating agency. So, but we want them to share that story and get it out there. Then when an anniversary rolls around, we'll help reach out to the local media outlets, see if it's a story that they would be willing to talk about and bring back into public light.
Is that hard to get them to get invested, or are most media outlets pretty good about that?
Well, because of the popularity of cold cases, it's not a hard sell. But what we do is we vet the reporters that we're working with.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Because similar to trying to teach reporters at a university how to engage with these families, it's important to us that a reporter buy in and understand what's really going on here. This is not about you as a reporter solving a case. This is about you as a reporter showing this family that their loved one had value enough to be on TV and to take your time and that their words matter,
Well, and I think you having them report what they do. We were talking about the student reporters here, highlighting their life. I think that's an immense value for two reasons. One, it's like you said, the value to the family and understanding that this is something that other people value too. But two, I would imagine, especially as a case goes on and for a length of time, the humanizing factor for somebody that might have done something horrible and is now older in life and might have regret and go, wow, that was a human that I did this horrible thing to, and it's time for me to come forward. I don't know how often it happens, but if it happens just once, it was worth it.
No, Judson, it has happened. It's not super common, but also, what people don't realize is technology is great, but there's not a camera everywhere yet. There's not always DNA. There's not always physical evidence. And a lot of times an investigation at least advances, if not is resolved, by a change in relationship. So somebody's in an abusive relationship back then when something happens and they're scared of their partner, so they don't talk. Well, now we're 30 years later. We're 33 years later for Terrell Orcutt. Like, why? if somebody was in that situation then, maybe they're not now. Maybe it was dependency issues or addiction issues back then, and maybe they've overcome those. Maybe they found religion. Whatever it is, maybe they have just grown a conscience. Like, we have to be trying to get to them so that they know the impact that decision made 33 years ago is still rippling through this family and this community. This person is out there. I say this regularly, like, the person that killed my dad, the person that killed Terrell Orcutt is, behind your spouse in line at the grocery store.
Yep.
Is,
That's scary.
Isn't that scary?
Yeah, that's scary.
And I think like they live at the house across from your kid's bus stop. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, that's what we're talking about here. Like, yes, some of them are incarcerated on other crimes and some of them have died. But the reality is it's just as easy to think that there's somebody sitting out there that committed this crime that you've run into, at the grocery store or the bank or something like that. And that's why, for us, it goes beyond just being a victim. It goes beyond just Terrell Orcutt. It's a public safety issue because everybody could be impacted by this individual that has the capability of doing this to a young woman in 1990. The chances are it probably is not the first time they've broken the law or the last, right? So, that's why work so hard to get this information out there as often as we can. And going back to the local media, we ask new reporters, because they all call us, will you give me some families? Will you give me some cases that I can do stories on? Come to our office, look at the pictures on our walls, sit down with the advocates, sit down with us and understand why we do this.
This is more than a splashy story. This is somebody's life.
Exactly.
And
this is not a stepping stone in your media career to get on Dateline. You know what I mean? Like, if that's what you view this as, then we're not really interested in working with you. So we have, a handful of reporters from the local stations, and the ones that have put in the work, we're more than willing to provide them as many families as they can handle for news stories. And typically their station is, very much willing to do that because it does generate viewers. And so those are ways, that we raise awareness for these cases. We did the cold case playing cards that included Terrell, pass those out around the state. And
I'm going to, for people that did not hear this last episode, these are cards with pictures of victims.
Yes.
And the idea is you get them into the penitentiary system or we've talked about other places there that aren't, like tattoo parlors and bars and stuff like that. But the point is they're out in the community and you see a face and it might trigger something, or if you're in jail, you might go, okay, I know something about this, then maybe this will help my case. I'm not here for that big of a deal, but I do know something.
Yeah.
And I imagine it works. Again, it doesn't matter if it doesn't work often. It matters that it works.
It just needs to work once.
It just needs to work. Exactly. And that's why, sharing it on the Sheriff's Office Facebook page, sharing it on the Project Cold Case Facebook page, getting it on the local outlets, getting it on this podcast. Like, we don't get to decide who hears and sees these things. Right. We don't know when they're going to do it. The great thing about a podcast is it's there. If somebody discovers this podcast 6 months from now or a year from now, they just go back and start at the beginning and listen, and they can
and they hear the name Terrell Orcutt.
Yeah, and they hear it over and over and over, and they know about the Red Thunderbird, and they know about 218, and they know about Lee Road, and all of a sudden the important stuff is, supersedes the rumor and the innuendo. And then hopefully, the detective can come in and maybe she has a specific ask for the community.
Yes, because we're going to bring Detective Katie Proper in. She was actually the investigating detective as part of the team on this case, and early on, and has stayed involved with the family and other stuff. So she will bring her in to talk specifics. And I believe the case was passed off to her when some detectives retired. And so she's the one that's sort of carrying the torch right now for the Clay County Sheriff's Office to make sure that we follow up on anything that comes in.
And is that how that works? So obviously cold cases can be, unfortunately, a very long time. Is it, so if a detective retires, do they just, their case goes, hey, this is a cold case, this is who's next, and how does that process work?
Yeah, so typically what will happen is if we know a detective is going to be retiring, they pull in a younger detective in and go through the entire case file with them. And I will tell you, I have not met a retired detective yet that's not willing to get back involved on a cold case because they invest so much into it. So Katie Proper is the one right now who's the torchbearer for this case for us.
And I spoke to Terrell's sister, yesterday. One of the things I always like to do is family permission. I mean, when they submit their loved one to us, you kind of check a little box that says, well, if you do this means we're going to move forward with every opportunity that we think is valuable. But as a courtesy, I like to keep in touch, know what's going on. My office does. I reached out, I was like, hey, I just want to make sure this is what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about Terrell's case. And she brought up Detective Proper's name multiple times and talked about good communication, which is not always something that we hear from families. It's probably the number one complaint is that, communication, again, kind of going back to something we mentioned about like the worst thing a detective has to do is go sit down with a family and tell them, the case is cold. Right behind that is calling them to say, yeah, I got nothing. There's still nothing, still nothing, so it's not a call that they like to make. But family is very happy with the communication that's going on. They're of course excited about breakthroughs in technology because when you get to 30 plus years in a case, pretty much the stones have been overturned. You need something. You need somebody to come forward with credible information. You need a technological breakthrough. You're kind of waiting on one of those two things. So when something like investigative genetic genealogy, comes out, which is kind of the biggest breakthrough in cold case investigations since DNA, the families their ears perk up and they start asking, is that something that you can do on my loved one's case? Is that something that is an option? And so we like to stay, in the know with that technology too, so that we can help families ask the right questions. You are not going to use genealogy if you don't have DNA, suspect DNA.
Right.
So that's the first question. Before you get too excited about it,
right,
you need to know, or your detective needs to know, is there suspect DNA? And if there is, then you can go on to those next questions.
Yeah, and Ryan brings up 2 points, and we'll let Detective Proper talk more about this. But, back years ago in the 1990s, I think we were good because they were just on the cutting edge of DNA being an investigative tool. But if you go back much further than that, when law enforcement packaged evidence, they just threw it in a box with a bunch of other stuff, and that was and you really destroyed in many ways a lot of potential DNA evidence inadvertently, not knowing they didn't know what DNA was.
That was
right?
The collection tactics at that time.
Just put it all in a box and box it up. And I think by the 1990s, law enforcement knew that this new technology was coming through, and there was much more deliberate and methodical packaging of evidence. But evidence still, even DNA, deteriorates.
It does.
And even if we have DNA, if the suspect has never been sampled, then we have DNA matched to nobody. It's not like we have DNA and it's going to tell us, John Smith is the suspect. You have to have DNA to match it to.
Right.
So there are cases out there where DNA does exist, but there's nobody to match it to.
Right. Makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, these are the things, for families, it's hard sometimes because we see today's investigative tactics and these policies and procedures, and we go back to these cases that were in the 70s and 80s. Some of them are being solved, and I'm not sure that people understand the miracle that, and the credit that should go to those that were collecting the evidence, to those that were storing the evidence, to those that didn't throw away the evidence or destroy the evidence inadvertently or otherwise, because I mean, the reality is a lot of these now, it's like, well, we didn't know that would be useful.
Right.
50 years down the road.
And we don't know 50 years down the road.
Right. And we don't know now. And so we just collected it. We collected it, and they deserve a lot of credit because without that, a lot of these cases wouldn't be solved. Genetic genealogy wouldn't be a thing, so.
I know we're here talking about Terrell Orcutt's case specifically, but speaking of evidence and breakthroughs, is there a case, Ryan, that resonates with you that we can share with the audience where you were like, wow, I can't believe that case got solved?
I'll talk about probably somebody Bobby Farah. He's a legend in Jacksonville.
Yes, he
every law enforcement officer knows Bobby. Well, Bobby's dad was murdered. Freddie Farah was murdered when Bobby was like 6 years old, and he owned a convenience store. And somebody came in to rob the convenience store in 1974 and shot Freddie Farah. So when you're talking DNA evidence, you're usually not looking at gun cases. You know what I mean? The technology is not quite there for a gun case, right, to produce DNA. So they automatically become even harder, to solve with the lack of physical evidence. So Bobby lives at a restaurant. I don't know if Southern Grill in San Marco area, and his cousin, I think, runs the restaurant, and he's always there. The cold case unit comes in for lunch one day in like 2018, and they all know Bobby, but they know him now. They don't know the story,
right?
So they're all talking, and they say, "Well, we're in the cold case unit now." And Bobby goes, "Oh gosh, my dad's case is a cold case," and they're all shocked, and they're like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "1974, somebody came in and shot my dad at the convenience store," and so I know this story because I know all the players. The reality was they were like, 1974. All right, we'll pull the file. Don't get your hopes up.
Right.
Here's Ryan's number in Project Cold Case. Let's go ahead and start there. They go back and they pull the file and they realize that there's fingerprints that have not been run in a number of years, like 10 years or something. They've been run, since 1974, but they hadn't been run in a number of years. So they run the fingerprints and they get a hit. And there was also a witness in the store that day. It was a 14-year-old girl. They call her and she says, "I remember it like it was yesterday." And this goes back to something we talked about on the last episode of like keeping certain things close to the chest that you don't always talk about. She says he walked up and he sat down, and I think I'll get it right. It's been a couple of years. A box of cake mix, a tin of cake frosting, and a soda. And then he pulled a gun and demanded the money. And Freddie swiped at the gun, and when he hit the gun went off, and the gunman ran out of the store, not taking anything. So sure enough, the fingerprints on all three of those items that the sheriff's office collected in 1974 match.
Wow. To
one individual. The story could go on a whole podcast or 10 on its own, but the long story short is they go out, they identify somebody that is a street performer in New Orleans now, and they arrest him 43 years, almost to the day after the murder of Freddie Farah.
Was that Detective Radigan?
That was, yes.
Yeah, Detective Radigan and Warkentine. Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
And,
two great homicide detectives out of Jacksonville.
Yeah, absolutely. And so just all the pieces fell into place. It was amazing. And then while he's awaiting trial, the young woman that was 14 at the time, she dies as a witness. And now they can't bring in this evidence because she's the only person that can say the shooter put it on the counter. And so they ultimately they end up striking a plea deal, which was only for time served, less than a year in county jail. But he agreed to meet with the family and sit down with them and talk to them about, why he did what he did and what happened that day. And, this is complex stuff. For some of the family, that was enough. Mm-hmm. If you ask Bobby, Bobby always wanted to know who killed his dad. Bobby's got, just a handful of memories of his dad at 6 years old, when he dies. That's what Bobby wanted to know was who. And Bobby got that information. For some of Bobby's siblings, that was not enough. And I understand it from both sides, and that was unfortunate the way that it played out. It was not the way that anybody wanted it to play out. But after 43 years, and I remember Bobby's, will tell the story about his mom saying, "Bobby, I can't believe you brought this up again. I just don't know. I don't think they're ever going to solve it." And by the way, Bobby's mom's the sweetest woman you've ever met, never remarried, raised all of the kids on her own. And they walked in, and the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office said, "We arrested a guy last night."
That's amazing.
Wow.
And that really gives me hope for the Terrell Orcutt case.
Yeah.
When something that nobody expected pops up, and it's that break that is needed. And I'm hoping that somebody who's listening to this podcast and paying attention to what's being said about Terrell's case, especially when we bring Detective Proper in to talk about it some more, can help us break the case.
It's going to be really interesting because now they've heard stories about Terrell's family, and Terrell has sisters that, by the way, are vigilant and getting this case solved. And they have some frustrations from, years of waiting that you can imagine. And they have a Facebook page. I think it's just Justice for Terrell Orcutt. But they have fought, tooth and nail for it. They want this obviously more than anybody. So you hear that story and you hope that plays to the heartstrings of somebody out there that may have, what happened. But now when the detective comes in, I mean, hopefully there's going to be some very specific things that people can think back on and be on the lookout. Yeah,
we're going to take a quick break. We'll shoot when we get back. We'll talk about the email, how to get in touch for that episode, and look forward to your questions. But we'll take a quick break. You're listening to Never Off Duty. You're back to Never Off Duty. Again, we've got Project Cold Case with us, and we were just talking about a very important case to Clay County and to a lot of people. While we're in the break, we were talking about how can people give tips. Now, obviously, your organization is not a tip organization, and you often refer to them to Crime Stoppers, which is anonymous,
right? And
also sometimes gives rewards. So just remember, if you were near one of these cold cases and look, this is a long time ago. Your life has probably changed, but you might be afraid to come forward. There is a way for you to come forward and communicate and help bring closure.
Yeah, so there's always a way to get that information to the right people. We do get tips occasionally. We don't solicit tips. If we do get a tip, we can't guarantee anonymity like Crime Stoppers can. We don't offer rewards. But if you're most comfortable sending it to me, then I'll make sure it gets to the right person. But otherwise, Terrell Orcutt or any cold case, is particularly in Clay County, you can call the Clay County Sheriff's Office. I think you have a tip.
We have the Safer Watch app,
right?
That people can submit tips on, and or they can call 904-264-6512 if they have any information. But going back to the website, you guys have 1,300 cases that you've highlighted. So if anybody has any information, they can go on there on any of them. Yeah,
and even beyond us, we accept cases that are submitted by families or law enforcement with family permission. So if there's a case out there that we may not have, like in fact some of the other ones from Clay County, the families have never reached out to us, so they're not highlighted on our website. But remember this too with tips. Crime Stoppers, First Coast Crime Stoppers, eligible for up to a $3,000 reward, anonymous. And that number is 866-845-TIPS. So if you are worried about, you having to testify, I hesitate to say that because quite honestly, you always make this case stronger if you're willing to testify. If you're willing to say like, look, I didn't come forward, but I'm coming forward now, and here's why. That makes that case stronger. Nothing's more frustrating to law enforcement than getting a legitimate tip from Crime Stoppers, but you can't use it because the person's not, because they're anonymous and they're not willing to testify, So
I mean, we'll take what we can get.
But
please, if you're willing, take that extra step to put your name out there. And they might have a follow-up question. You might know the detective might be able to find they know some piece that you don't know, and they can ask that one question that might lead to a case getting closed. And we've talked about the fascination that the community has with cold cases, but remember, your tip might bring closure to a family that's been suffering, and that's huge, that you can really make a difference in somebody's life if you know something. So you have a great organization. ProjectColdCase.org is where you go to. please go. And the sheriff's email address is
sheriff@claysheriff.com. Listeners can submit tips if they have tips. They can submit questions if they have questions. And in fact, in one of the upcoming episodes, we're going to be answering a bunch of the questions that have been submitted.
Yeah, we and I appreciate.
I've got a stack of them,
and the people that grab me from the street. Because people do know who I do a lot of public things, and somebody be like, "Oh yeah, I heard your podcast. I got a question for you." So I have been writing them down, and we will get to those. But this was a very important episode to get in early, and we're not done with it. We're going to talk more about other cold cases. I encourage you to reach out to Project Cold Case if your family needs an advocate. And I think that's the key. I like that you said we're an advocate for the family, and I think that's very important. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we close out this show?
Just my appreciation for being invited and being able to help raise awareness for these cases and offer a perspective that most people out there don't necessarily have never heard. So thank you for that opportunity. I look forward to hopefully coming back and talking about more cold cases and other things in the future.
Thank you for all you do, Ryan.
Yes, thank you so
Sheriff.
much.
Thank you, Judson.
Well, you're listening to Never Off Duty. Please share and review us, and send us emails and let us know what you'd like to talk about. We appreciate you.